Well, Joel, thanks very much for joining me. I'm really thrilled that you're agreeing to participate in this important conversation about how we get out of this mess, because while the health issues in this crisis are being dealt with, I think it really is important that we now have a great national debate about how we rebuild the economy of Australia post-coronavirus. And really, rebuilding the economy is actually about rebuilding people's lives, because the economy is about people. So thanks for being involved. Let's just get into it. What are your thoughts on where we go from here?
Well, it's a great pleasure to catch up, and you're right. It's a really important debate is ahead of us. We've just been through an event of a lifetime, something you and I won't see again, and it's going to sometime more from a health economic crisis to purely an economic crisis. And how we respond to it will determine our standard of living over the course of the next many decades. And many of the economic orthodoxies we've lived under now for almost 40 years will be challenged, and so they should be. But we need to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is no sort of socialist nirvana out there. I see some people creeping toward that mirage. We do have to be sensible. We have to stick to the fundamentals. The architecture we live under now and have lived under for almost 40 years have served us really, really well. Our living standards have continued to grow by any measure. We've had some problems creep into our society: growing inequality, stagnating wages. This is an opportunity to address some of those. But again, on any measure, we've been doing very, very well, and we have to stick to the basics. And can I say, neoliberalism is not dead and should not be dead. It's served us well, and we should give it another opportunity.
Look, why don't we plunge into a particular area? I mean, you're a regional New South Wales MP, the Great Hunter Valley and the coal mining that goes on there, but also, in the past there's been, the steelworks and a great manufacturing base. It's still there, but across Australia, my sense of it is that we've seen a fair bit of deindustrialisation and exporting jobs overseas. I mean, what are the reasons for that? Well, to my mind, sort of, yes, we have wages here, higher wages than overseas. We have a lot of red tape and bureaucracy from government, and makes it hard and risky to run businesses, and I think unnecessarily. And we've got very high energy costs. I mean, just if we could deal with 2 out of 3 there, do you think we could actually get our manufacturing going again and going the other way?
In some areas, absolutely. Let's have a look at our economy. We're a trading island continent with a small population. We once lived under a settlement which drove higher standards of living behind wages set centrally, funded by a high tariff war. But we long ago worked out that was not sustainable. And it wasn't, and we moved to the architecture we now live under today. Our exports are so critical to us. We've got to be open to the world. The only way you can grow your economy is to enhance productivity or to grow your market, or both. And we can't grow our market here in Australia. And we've got this abundance of natural resources, petroleum, oil, gas, minerals, coal, in addition to agricultural product, which the world is craving for, and we need to stay in those markets. Now, we've also got to make sure that our human and capital resources go to the areas where we have comparative advantage. This is not a new concept. We long ago gave up making T-shirts because T-shirts can be made in the Pacific somewhere where people are paid $1 a day. So you don't allocate your resources to that area, you put them where they're delivering the highest return. And of course, the resources sector has helped us through this crisis in a very, very big way. And we need to keep our eye on the ball there and make sure those primary industries remain strong. Manufacturing, we need to make things where we can do it better than someone else. We can't, in the aim of self-sufficiency, be trying to inefficiently make things that can be done better elsewhere or cheaper elsewhere. The economic textbook hasn't changed on that front, but there are 2 exceptions. One is not an exception. There are areas where we can do it better, or we have to do it here, like meat processing, which is one of our biggest manufacturing sectors, or areas where we want to strive towards self-sufficiency. Now, this is like an insurance policy. We all insure our house because it might burn down one day. Now, we need to manufacture certain health products because the day might come where we can't get them offshore. And we need to be more self-sufficient in our fuels because fuel drives our economy, including our defence. So if our sea lanes of communication get blocked off one day, we need to be able to both fuel our defence force, but also our industry and indeed our transport sector. So there's two areas where you might, pay a premium or do something which is not economically efficient in the name of giving yourself that protection. Now, we're about 90% import dependent for our fuels, Campbell. I mean, this is getting worse every year. So surely there's a case for a government seeking to somehow incentivise refining here in this country, although refining is not too good if you don't have the raw product. And we are declining in raw product. We can return to that subject, but it's largely because of the rise of environmental activism.
Yeah.
You might be able to incentivise refining and storage here in Australia. But the areas where we do have a comparative advantage, like meat processing, we face the heavy burden of regulation. Our charges for quarantine and inspection in this country, I wish I could recall the number, but it's sort of tenfold what it is in South America, for example. Now, we're trying to sell our high quality meat products into the same markets as the South Americans. We're losing that geographic advantage because freight rates are plummeting. And they're going to have an advantage because of this heavy regulatory burden. So if we can address those regulatory burdens in the manufacturing sectors where we do have some advantage, then our manufacturing sector could be much stronger.
Well, look, why don't we just take in turn some of the themes that I could draw out of that. One of them, okay, on the regulatory front, I actually have a bee in my bonnet. I run a small commercial property fund. We deal all the time with various government agencies, and we find their IT systems don't meet the promise of what's put out there about being able to easily interact with government. For example, one agency that we're required to register with, recently it took 3 hours across about 3 weeks of cumulative time to actually try and do what we were required to do by the law. And I feel that's not good enough. Those are sort of micro examples. What can we do to actually sort of, in a very systematic way, go through and just get stuck into this red tape and get some rationality there?
I put a fire hose on populism. That would be a good start. Look, my bookshelf is full of, well, not so much just my bookshelf, but bookshelves generally. I wouldn't want to suggest I had 100 Productivity Commission reports on my bookshelf. That would be a fear. I have too many. They're full of, we've come through this health crisis, or hopefully we're nearing the end of the health crisis, by following expert advice. But we seem to have lost our will to follow expert advice on the economic front. And the Productivity Commission has a bookshelf of reports out there just gathering dust. Let me give you one example in one of my portfolios area, agriculture. One of the first acts of the Abbott government was to commission the Productivity Commission to look at regulation in the agriculture sector. And the PC produced a brilliant piece of work, in my view. It's easy to understand and explains the industry to people and tells us in each subsector how we need to remove certain pieces of regulation to lift productivity in the agriculture sector. Still gathering dust. Not one, I shouldn't say not one, I might have missed one, but barely, it's never really been formally responded to by the government. And there may be one, there may be two in a report, about this thick. The government hasn't adequately responded, and this is happening across the economy generally. We need to get back to expert advice. We need to follow expert advice. Yes, challenge it, absolutely. I mean, I've been sat in a cabinet and challenged expert advice myself, but at least have the challenge, have the conversation, and let's get out on the other side with some real reform. I know I don't want this to be a political conversation today, but I mean, name me what have been the big reform projects for this government over the course of the last 7 years. We haven't really had them. We were managing the economy, not transforming the economy in the face of a rapidly changing world, and we need to be more bold about it.
Well, look, I'm going to join with you on a bit of a unity ticket there, and my own side who might end up watching this might be saying, oh, but what about this, what about that? But well, look, I'm the son of a former Fraser government era minister, and I know what the ethos was, Joel, back in those days about national development and building this country. We had the post-World War II generation who were still around, and they were people who actually had an ethos that was like, this is the way the country's living, these are the incomes, and they had a vision to take Australia to the next level. And that's how we got metal processing and things like down your Tomago, for example, and down at Portland in Victoria with aluminium, and Gladstone, Queensland, the coal industry, and all sorts of other projects you can point at. And yet I have this sense that we're in a malaise, that it's across the nation. It infects business as well, big business. But I think you're dead right. There's been a lack of will on reform, real reform, and actually thinking boldly about how to actually take the country to the next level. So I think that's critically important.
I don't deny reform hasn't become harder. It has. Short news cycle, social media, what's happening around the globe, it's all making it more difficult, particularly at the federal level where we have this crazy short electoral cycle. It's really hard to reform these days, but why do you want to be a government?
Yeah.
If you're not going to reform, and you're not going to have a legacy.
Yeah, I have that view, and again, I could say that I could criticise people from across the political spectrum. Why don't we dive into an issue which is the issue of energy pricing, whether it be gas. You alluded to us sort of seeing our oil production going down, and also there's the issue of electricity prices. To sort of help you out here, I'll put myself out on a bit of a creaky branch. Yeah, I'm a climate skeptic. I still have a view that there's contradictory information coming through about the science. Having said that, I say to you and our viewers today, I'm exasperated by the impasse, and I really think we need to come up with a compact that actually gives certainty. We've got to move beyond that, and I'm even prepared to cop a carbon price these days. I'm really going out the end of a creaky branch, but I feel like we've got to deal with this because at the end of the day, what you were saying about the costs of if you're trying to process meat in Australia and you're competing with some offshore location that's only paying half to a third in terms of electricity prices, well, you've got an immediately disadvantage.
Well, obviously, high energy costs are one of the things undermining our competitive advantage in manufacturing, whether from aluminium to meat processing, you name it, it's a problem. And there are two areas there, of course. One, and they do align. One is gas. We need to get more gas out of the ground. We have an abundance of it. I mean, our economy is underpinned by the resources sector. Our coal and iron ore exports are our two largest export earners, and it's our export earnings which pay for our flat screen televisions and our iPhones and our motor vehicles. So, without the resources sector, our economy, we wouldn't have the relatively high standard of living that we have today. But in addition to that, domestically, we need natural gas to fund both to be a feedstock in the manufacturing sector, fertilisers, etc., but also to fuel those plants, whether it be turned first into electricity or more directly. And we have this rise of environmental activism, which has just become a religion. Now, I understand people in some communities are concerned about, for example, getting coal seam gas out of the ground. And there will be places where you just can't jump appropriate environmental hurdles. But, too many people now just treat every project as if it's the same. That is, this is an evil product, it's doing evil things to our environment, and it's just not true. Now, if we don't start getting some more gas out of the ground, then our manufacturing industry is going to decline. Now, in Queensland, your place, farmers over the last 10 years received about $500 million between them from gas companies for the right to enter their land for the purposes of their project. So there could be a great compact here between the gas companies, farmers, and the environment if we're smart about it. We're so busy fighting this environmental fight that we've taken our eye off the ball. Now, on electricity, what we know is that our coal generation fleet is ageing. And with or without a carbon tax, investors aren't showing any inclination in investing in new plants. Why? Because they're really expensive and you need about at least a 40-year return. And you and I don't know what the energy sector's or system's going to look like in 10 years, let alone in 40 years. And no one's going to bet on the idea that they're going to be getting a good return in 30 years' time. So they're just not investing. So we've got an underinvestment in the electricity sector. We've got an underinvestment in new technologies because of this policy vacuum we now have, where we don't have an energy policy in this country and therefore everyone's scared to invest. Until we settle on a policy, that will continue to be the case. And there is room surely for bipartisanship. It's not just about climate change. It's about delivering affordable and reliable electricity to consumers and industry alike. And yet, as mature as we claim to be, we don't seem to be able to get a settlement. Now, Malcolm Turnbull's been in the news a bit of late. We had a settlement on the National Energy Guarantee, but the right wing in the Liberal Party rolled him and the rest is history. And how sad is it that this is such a serious issue still in our communities and within industry, and it's all still a problem because people in Canberra weren't mature enough to find a settlement.
Well, the point that you've made about, say, Queensland and gas actually illustrates what can happen if people put aside the political clubs for a moment and actually do what's right for the community. So the Bligh government, got right behind the coal seam gas industry. The then state LNP opposition supported in a bipartisan way. When I got into office, we made some policy tweaks. We set up the Gasfields Commission to ensure that, if you like, an independent umpire to sort of arbitrate between, the rights and needs of farmers versus the gas companies. And it's actually worked really, really well. And so we've got an export industry for LNG. I'd hope that we could take a leaf out of that book and see that happen in New South Wales, which has obviously been in a sort of an impasse, and then in Victoria. And by the way, do you care to comment on what the Premier of Victoria, Daniel Andrews, did recently? There was a bit of a glimmer of hope that maybe he's going to open up the door to allow gas to be looked at in Victoria now.
Well, he says he is going to allow it to be looked at in Victoria, so he's lifted that moratorium, and I welcome that.
Yeah,
it's going to be catch-up post the pause for some time to come, but that's good news. Gladys Berejiklian in New South Wales sort of says the right things, but Santos's Narrabri project has now been under consideration for almost 10 years. I mean, you can't attract investment into the resources sector, or any sector for that matter, if people have a look at history and can see they're going to be 10 years in the making. What's the Ackland mine?
Well, Ackland's actually in the media up here today, Joel, and essentially they're shovel ready, but there's no decision on that yet, which is a great pity because a whole community is relying on that, and the city of Toowoomba as well will benefit greatly from the ongoing boost to the economy.
Can I just say that I'm all for the highest environmental standards, but people need to know what the rules are clearly and what the end date is. Now, 9, 10, 15 years is just crazy, and it's even worse when it starts to be war gamed by environmentalists. Let me give you an example. Equinor were seeking the right to explore for oil in the Great Australian Bight. Now, that would have been a great boon to our resources sector and our oil self-sufficiency if they'd been successful there. But having secured the final approval, they declared that they couldn't raise the capital they need to go to the next phase. Now, I'm sure that is true, but I'm just as sure, and I'm not speaking for them because they haven't directly said this, but I'm sure in the back of their minds was the appeal being lodged by environmental activists, backed by the Environmental Defenders Office, which would have dragged the approvals process out further beyond the expiration season.
Yeah.
I've no doubt in my mind that in the end, Equinor just decided they just couldn't afford to take that risk.
Well, look, that gets us to this whole issue that I've had a bee in my bonnet about for probably about 8 years now, which is the Environmental Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act, I think of 1996 or 97, the EPBCA. I won't. So
John Howard, I think like 2001. I could be wrong.
It's a Howard government piece of legislation, which has obviously had some amendments on the way. My opinion is that that is the most dangerous piece of legislation in this country. Julie Gillard had started to have a look at it, and then, for whatever reason, pulled back. The Abbott government again made noises and pulled back. Malcolm Turnbull, I'm not aware of any moves that he's made. I would hope that the Morrison government, after all this, with support from Labor, could make some changes. Do you sort of care to venture what perhaps amendments might be appropriate?
Well, just on the last point first, you said after all of this, one of the big parts of the coming economic conversation and policy conversation more generally will be the concept of a mandate. What does Scott Morrison have a mandate to do or not to do now? He's already saying that he's got a mandate not to do what he promised to do because of the crisis, and that is a reasonable point. But on the other side of the equation, you can't then claim you've got a mandate to do other things that might be popular or unpopular because of the crisis. But look, the EPBC, in large part, goes along without causing any controversy. And like most things, I'll make this number up, but maybe 98% of the things it does efficiently and without fuss. But of course, we hear and read about the things that become held up. I suppose it depends on in the first instance, a question of whether you want the Commonwealth involved in environmental approvals. And I think most Australians would say yes, we do want the Commonwealth involved, and that's what the EPBC Act is all about. Really, it's giving the Commonwealth a final say on these things where water, flora and fauna of national significance are affected. So I think the principle is still sound, but somewhere in the mix there obviously from times when the process gets just too hard for investors, and as a result, we lose investment and we lose jobs.
Well, I guess
I don't have the. I mean, it's very detailed act. I don't have the answers, but we need to be conscious in this rebuilding period, this recovery period, that we need to take the foot off the regulation, allow investment to come forward, and to get the economy going again, and to create jobs again.
Well, look, my 5 cents worth on this one is that I can point to the problem with it. It's you essentially have these schedules which are the matters of national environmental significance, and the tables that then have the various endangered species, and those tables have grown since the Act was put in place, and essentially it is something that the brief, the expansion of the remit of this particular piece of legislation goes on unabated, and I think you've got to go and address that. And it doesn't seem to me, Joel, to be something that is involved in there's no concept of trade-offs. It's like, I mean, bluntly, there'll always be a special blade of grass or a cute furry marsupial or a lungfish, and here's my example I'd use to you, and I'm lobbying you now as a senior Labor frontbencher. If Anna Bligh couldn't build a dam when southeast Queensland and Australia's third largest city was running out of water, I think we were down to 15% at the time when I was the mayor. If Anna Bligh couldn't build a dam to provide drinking water for the needs of the community on the basis of the EPBCA and Peter Garrett's decision, what hope is there of building a dam anywhere, because they're all in a more pristine catchment? So that's my poster project of how bad this actually can be. But I don't know if you want to comment, but that's the point I make. Yeah.
You know what I've been saying since the last election, Campbell? I want to put Labor back in the Labor Party.
Yeah.
I want to refocus on the people we were born to represent.
Yes.
Blue collar workers, typically in the resources sector, including coal mining, manufacturing, in forestry, etc. But on the other side of the equation, you know, it's okay. I mean, you use the list of species. I mean, the fact is that right around the world, we are losing species, and we also find new species that are endangered. So of course the list will grow. So it's great to represent blue collar workers, for example. There's not much point in doing that if there's not an environment to sustain their grandchildren. So this is the difficult policy mix. But I think you are right. I think the pendulum has swung too hard on the side of caution, I suppose. And I think we're a modern society. We are innovative. We are smart. And we need to be able to find new ways of doing things while at the same time making them a sustainable proposition. Surely we're smart enough to do that. And I think you're right. I mean, the reluctance to build dams is a very, very good example. Not that I think the dams, by the way, are the solution to everything. I mean, people would have you. I mean, you know Queensland even better than me. I mean, those vast areas where they grow cattle aren't going to be served by a dam because you can't reticulate. You can't get that water to those remote locations. So they certainly have a role to play. And by the way, the last dams that were built in Australia were built by a Labor government in Canberra, which is somewhat ironic for the purposes of this debate. But yeah, I think as we go through this recovery process, I think one of the things we have to ask ourselves is whether the pendulum has swung too hard, and whether we're just making it too hard to invest in this country.
Well, I think we are, and I think one final question for you before we perhaps go to sort of training and education, but is like, should we perhaps, another approach here is to put some, there are time frames in these things, but bluntly, I've been there, I've seen it happen. These things are almost war game by the activists and by, I'm afraid, bureaucrats. But should we have very strict time frames that, bottom line is, you know that when you enter the process, you either get a yes or a no after 2 years or 3 years, and that's the worst, that a proponent can come to expect.
Well, I think one of the challenges there, of course, would be locking out the judicial process. I mean, people have a right to challenge, although that's been legislated away many times before. Projects of state significance in New South Wales, can't be challenged in the Land and Environment Court, or when I was in local government, they couldn't be. So there are examples, and certainly, while I don't necessarily agree with your method of getting there, but it's feasible and it's an idea and it might be a worthy one. The first step is to agree that we need to do something about investment certainty in this country. And if we can agree to do that, then we can talk about how we deliver it.
Okay. Well, let's move to people and education and training. And by the way, I really noted what you said just now, and been noting your comments since May last year about the Labor Party and looking after blue-collar people, because frankly, you're absolutely dead right. If I can, as an outsider, make that observation, I think that's the thing. So in wooing them back, it is about projects and job opportunities and opportunities for their families, their kids. What about education and training, though? I think there's a big issue in the TAFE sector that we just haven't dealt with, that needs reform. I think our schools aren't coping with the needs of the 21st century. I think they're well resourced, but I don't know that the teachers quite understand really where they're meant to be taking the whole thing about the needs of our kids. So what are your thoughts on what we should be doing post-coronavirus?
Well, you'd rather have a son or a granddaughter about to qualify for a trade now than you've got a son or a granddaughter about to qualify as a professional. Maybe even, I heard of an anaesthetist who has been laid off recently, a young guy, a friend of one of my kids. Who'd have thought? So a trade is a great thing to have at the moment, particularly if government's going to be smart and pump money into infrastructure projects. And both political parties take some responsibility. The deregulation of the training system has been a failure. And no wonder talking about TAFE is so popular in our communities. When I give public or semi-public speeches to Labor Party types, there are two things I know will get me a round of applause: mentioning how difficult or bad the NBN is, or talking about restoring TAFE. And people are right. And we need to ensure that we deliver the training people need to fit into the world of tomorrow. And it's going to be a more sophisticated world. One of the mythologies about automation in the mining industry is that there are going to be no jobs. Now, not true. There are going to be lots of jobs in the mining industry if it can move to full automation, but there'll be different jobs. There'll be more technical jobs even than they are now. So we need to make sure that the kids at the school today have the training, the opportunity to train into those jobs. And the system we have simply isn't delivering that. And that's going to be one of the big conversations we have post this crisis.
Let me try this on you. I have a view firstly, before I say that, I totally agree with you in terms of the job prospects of a young person. In fact, I used to joke, I've been saying this for quite a few years, that I've got two daughters, and I used to say, I hope my daughter either becomes a plumber or marries a plumber, because I thought that's where the real action and the remuneration was going to be. And I think that is in accordance with what you just said. But I reckon that there's this complete imbalance between the way we treat sort of technical education and the vocational education and universities still. I'd like to see them put on a level playing field where, firstly the kids aren't being, for a long time, I think in the 90s, we're telling kids, you've got to go to uni. What a load of bosh. So there was that philosophical attitude, almost snobbishness, but then there's the actual way, the funding model and the way it's then delivered for the young people.
Well, it's absolutely true too that kids will perform if they're doing the things they like. Now, I'm a tradesman myself, and I was pretty pedestrian in high school because I didn't like what I was doing. I couldn't wait to get out of there and go and do a trade. But when I did my formal studies in my trade, I excelled as a student because I was doing something I was interested in and something I enjoyed doing. And that seems to be forgotten. How many young people do you know they go off to university, they've had to pick a discipline because they've got to pick one, and they get halfway or a third through because they just don't enjoy what they're doing. We need to give young people more options, but more particularly in the more modern economy, the one which hopefully we face in the not too distant future, that choice will be one which does involve more sophistication. Automation of mining is another example. And they'll only have that hope if they get a good primary school and high school education. And I know the Gonski thing all got a bit lost in the political hurly-burly, and no one really knows what Gonski is, but we do need to ensure that our public schooling system, which still delivers for about 60% of our children, is one of sufficiently high quality to give those young people the opportunities in a modern economy. And I think we have a long way to go before we reach that standard. The problem now is that we're going to be entering a period where we need to be reducing government spending and reducing government debt, while at the same time still requiring a stronger investment in our education system. So there are some very significant debates ahead of us.
I was looking at something recently, and I don't know, and I don't have all the details here today, but Singapore's got a thing called Skills Future. They've got basically a training and development sort of board or commission, which basically is there to ensure that across people's lives in the workforce, they can actually reskill and retrain as circumstances change. But rather than be, as it often happens in Western nations like Australia or the US, where people retrain or have to retrain as a result of a business going bust or the job opportunities drying up. This is a more proactive sort of program. But it's, as I said, it's called Skills Future. But one of the interesting things there is everybody gets an account. You get a training account. You get $500 sort of cash in the account, which you can spend on the courses that you need, and you can. It's the idea is that it's topped up by yourself and also topped up by your employer. And I think if you're over 50 or something like that, you get another extra $500 tipped in as well. So interesting sort of concept. Just wondered if you'd seen that. It might be worth having a look at it in a conversation here in Australia.
No, I haven't looked at the Singapore model, but I've looked at many across the globe, and it's always fraught with difficulty comparing Australia with other countries because our circumstances are so often very different. But certainly we need to have affordable, lifelong learning opportunities. But, we do rely on the private sector heavily to fund our training, and so we should, because they are in part the beneficiaries of the training. But you can't expect them to be investing heavily in training if they don't know what their own futures look like. And they don't know what their own future looks like at the moment because they don't know what energy policy is going to look like in the future. They've got huge uncertainty about over environmental approvals. They're worried now about the post-COVID period and whether populism will further take hold, as it seems to be in part the case in the United States. And so they don't really know whether the system of government we have is up to making the tough and hard decisions that will be required to give them the platform to invest in their own people. I think it's worth just mentioning some of the policy dilemmas we face. I mean, I think the biggest impact of COVID-19 will be on strategic policy and how it shapes the geopolitics of the globe. And, we've been juggling here for some time the challenges of a good friend and ally on one hand, the United States, and our greatest trading partner, China, on the other. And let's be honest about it, this crisis we've just been through is going to fuel that challenge, not make it any easier. So we do need to be calm and methodical in our response to the crisis, and be very sensible about it. And again, stick to as many of the orthodoxies that have served us so well in the past. Yeah, be flexible and agile in our policy responses. But I think politically we've got some big challenges ahead of us. And what we say now, in today, tomorrow, and the next few weeks, will count very much in the months and years ahead. So I think a few people out there need to think hard before they speak.
I know exactly where you're coming from, and perhaps we could point to the United States at the moment, which I think it's starting to become quite a big issue. There are very interesting comments being made by people in the financial markets who are, you would hope, sober and sensible, but they're talking quite openly about reparations from China and things like that, which I suppose in some ways it's understandable from their perspective, but I don't know that that ultimately that will serve any good purpose. But the strategic environment is becoming, I think, quite worrying.
But one of the great risks for us is on the movement of money, for example. I mean, for all of our lives, Australia, we've relied heavily on foreign investment. Initially, it came largely from the Americas and the UK and China, and still does, not China, New Zealand, and still does. But the rise of Asian investment is growing, and we need it desperately to function as an economy. As a country of 25 million people, we just don't have the savings, notwithstanding the great store of superannuation funds we now have. We just don't have the savings to invest in what we need to do. And already in recent years, you've seen the current government fitted with thresholds for the Foreign Investment Review Board. They put David Irving on as chair of the FIRB as a way of sending a message, and I've got enormous respect for David, but it was there to send a message, and you've got this populist uprising in the community against Asian investment. And there's a real risk here that post this crisis, that opposition to that foreign investment will grow stronger. And if it does, that's going to do great harm to our economy. Now, in the agriculture sector, my other portfolio, a report done by ANZ Bank, probably back in about 2015 now, it's a bit old, suggested that to meet our ambitions in the agriculture sector, we'll need $600 billion, that's with a B, of investment in the agriculture sector after 2050. Now, we can't secure that investment without being inviting of foreign investors. So, we can close ourselves to the rest of the world, but if we do, we'll do it to great detriment to ourselves. And this is a real danger to Australia over the course of the coming months.
I'd certainly agree with you there. I think we just can't have this crazy overreaction to the times that we've seen. Well, Joel, I reckon that's about it. Thank you so much for participating. Yeah, really, really do appreciate it. Yeah.
A great pleasure.